I actually work for the Lakeland campus in Osaka, and it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Tompkins from Lakeland, Tompkins.
Thank you.
Well, I forgot to mention, as we did in the morning, we will have all the presentations, so 20 minutes each, and question and answers at the end. And please don't forget that once this panel is over, there is the student symposium. So please do not go and wander around the Shinjuku for an hour before the next presentation starts. We have an event scheduled.
There we go. Maybe? Okay. All right. So I'm going to talk today about a project that we've initiated here at Lakeland College, Japan, myself and Charles Laurier. It's been going for a few semesters, and it's in the long run, it should be a digital humanities project, but the component that I'm going to talk about today relates to service learning. So to just briefly give you a definition of service learning is essentially community service with a learning component built in that can integrate with a student's coursework. So community service, that can be volunteerism in the community, right? Collecting donations for an animal shelter, which could be very good for that organization, good for the community as a whole, but doesn't necessarily integrate well with college coursework. So with this project, it's integrated in with courses. It's also an extracurricular activity that students can participate in. And students that have participated in this project have done such things as conduct oral history interviews. They've translated text and speech from Japanese to English and English to Japanese. Some have created videos or manga to better tell the story of this particular episode in Japanese-U.S. relations, and some have performed music at events commemorating this historic struggle. So the Tsunagawa Toso, which is what it's centered on, just to give you a little background of that, I'm not going to go into detail of it, but basically after World War II, during the period of occupation with the United States, the American Air Force out in West Tokyo operated the base Tachikawa Air Base, and because of the larger size of American jets, they needed to extend the runway. So the old runway is right here, and then north of the base, this was the base boundary, north of the base, they wanted to extend the runway into the community of Tsunagawa. Had they done that, then it would have basically bisected the community, destroyed the integratedness of it, and displaced about, I think it was in the neighborhood of 100 families. So many of the Tsunagawa residents sold, but about 40 resisted, and that's what evolved into the Tsunagawa Toso, or struggle. So when those 40 families refused to allow surveyors onto their land to mark off the property boundaries, word got out about that. They drew support from a variety of entities, from labor unions to student activists. They blocked surveying. They, as their numbers swelled, they had marches, they had large rallies outside of Tachikawa Station. There's a famous court case that developed related to this, where somebody scaled a fence in order to challenge Article 9. And they faced down baton-wielding riot police, refusing to give ground. Now, this struggle was ultimately successful. In 1969, the United States Air Force announced that Tachikawa Air Base would be shuttered, land returned back to Japan. It gets returned in 1977. And in 1983, this gets turned into Shogakukan Park, a large urban green space to the west. The episode, however, as successful as it was, is oftentimes forgotten. Many of our Japanese students and even residents that I talk to, I live in Toshikawa, many of the residents that I talk to there aren't really familiar with this past episode, despite its successfulness. I wasn't. I learned about it visiting Shogakunin Park from one of the volunteers there. Charles and I started digging, and one of the first things that we did was invite Kyoko Fukushima, who she's the daughter of one of the central activists. We invited her to LCJ to give a talk. She used to be a school teacher. She's very passionate about the subject. She runs a small museum, the Tsurugawa Heiwa Hiroba Museum, by herself. And she came down and she delivered her talk in Japanese, but we're in English campus with a global student population, and so we had two students translate on the spot what she was saying from Japanese to English, and then Q&A translate back and forth. When this event happened, it was well attended. People were lining the walls and sitting on tables in the back. And the comments that I got from students was that they really appreciated hearing from Kyoko Fukushima because it was something different than they got in textbooks. There was a passion, a personalness to that that they couldn't get just from reading the text, and it engaged them. And there were students that academically underachieved or didn't put their efforts into the class, and several of those students were profusely asking questions. They'd ask questions, they'd ask a follow-up question, very engaged, and it was a really successful event. The next thing that we did, or the next thing that I'll talk about, is we actually got out of the classroom. We got students out to Tochikawa Shogakunin Park on a weekend, and did a couple things there. We took historic maps of the base, and then we overlaid them on satellite photography. And we had a number of historic photographs taken by American servicemen in the 1950s, 1960s. And then we got bikes and we rode around the park to sort of map the land and re-photographed those spots from the same location as best we could determine to show that change over time. So here we are trying to identify where photographs were taken. We have our maps there. This is one of the students. This is a Komorebi Hill that's actually built out of American military-based buildings. After we did that photographing, we went then to the Tsurugawa Museum. Again, we had Kyoko Fukushima here. This gentleman is an activist, that he was a young man in 1955. And in this small museum, you can see the photos of the struggle in the background here. He allowed us to do an oral history interview, record an oral history interview with him. And this combination of re-photography and doing an oral history interview, actually meet somebody that was central to the making of this history, central to this campaign, really made an impact on the students. And we've done several oral history interviews. One of them, a couple students were featured in the Tokyo Shinbun. We've had other students that corresponded with American service people living in the States versus or via email. And so we're trying to build up that massive primary data, primary sources. The final one that I'll talk about is our participation in an event last October. This was the 60th anniversary commemoration of the start of the Tsurugawa Toso. And again, it was on a Saturday, but we had a large turnout. We had 20 students and faculty that showed up for the event. They worked in shifts. Sayaka here who had been with the project from the beginning. She had since graduated, but the project had so engaged her that she went forward on her own and continued to stay in communication with the community members, and she played a central role in coordinating the day's activities. She emceed throughout the afternoon. I gave a short speech in English in the afternoon, and Sayaka translated it to Japanese for the audience members. And then we had a musical performance here with LCJ students. Some of them had left the school, but they came back for this particular event. Chihiro here, who plays drums and guitar, he had left the school, and then I contacted him because he's sort of known as the good drummer around here. He's playing guitar in this photo. But he said, I remember that from when she came and talked, I'd be happy to do that, right? So that first event that we did really made an impact on him. Now, a lot of the tasks that we did that day were basic manual labor type things. We arrived early, we set up chairs, we set up tables, served lunch. Toru here manned a table with pamphlets and information. And then we helped break down at the end. So a lot of it was just sort of routine manual labor, not really learning expressly in that day's activities. But even when we were doing that, we were still able to learn from the speeches and the performances that were going on and share in the spirit of that commemoration. Now, getting to how that empowers students, it does so in a number of ways. So from the students that I've had here, particularly the ones that have gone through Japanese schools, one of the things that I regularly hear about history classes, not just Japanese, but I hear a lot from the Japanese students, is that they don't like history because what they know about history is that it's just one damn fact after another. Right? It's just rote memorization. Right? So this is a benefit to students because it actually gets them into the craft of doing history. Right? So one of my mentors, Linda Sargent Woods, said that students learn history best by doing history and having them out in the field, conducting oral history interviews, doing translation, meeting people. Right? That brings history alive. That even in a local place like Tachikawa, they can understand these broader historical trends that are happening. Students gain experience by working collaboratively on projects. I meant to bring, it's upstairs, the students that participated in the 60th anniversary event, they made a commemorative book to give to the community. Right? So a group of students that had volunteered that day took photographs and then they wrote text, first in English, and then they translated it to Japanese, and then they had a staff member read the Japanese, make sure that it was worded appropriately, and then we delivered those commemorative books to the community so that they could remember it as well, or remember it visually with that. Students should increasingly value political participation by engaging in these sorts of activities. So this project in particular is focused on a social movement, a successful social movement, and that in itself is arguably important in contemporary Japan when you have things like the State Secrets Bill, when you have news media underreporting civic activism, right? Whether it's anti-nuclear or some Article 9 or what have you. Right? So knowing that Japanese have been active in the past and there is this long history of social movement can be empowering to students that change is possible. It also makes them more engaged members of the community. Right? So going back to an American educational reformer, John Dewey, he's a philosopher and educational reformer, as I mentioned. In 1916, he said, democracy is more than a form of government. It is primarily a mode of associated living. With that notion of associated living, right, he's stressing that democracy engenders greater understanding, compassion, and an ethic of care within the citizenry. Now that bears out in this context with Kyoko Fukushima writing a letter to, yeah. Oh, fine, okay. With Kyoko Fukushima, she wrote a letter afterwards saying that the LCJ participation and students really added to the diversity, the generational diversity. We had Americans and Japanese there, Canadian, and that really made the event a better spectacle. And she hoped that the voice, that voice of peace that began back in 1955 would carry on to new generations. Students with a diverse range of skills can contribute their talents. So as I mentioned, that students that weren't necessarily high academic achievers, right, still found ways to participate. Right? Whether that was playing Bob Dylan and John Lennon songs at the reunion, right? They found some way to connect and some way to learn. Right? Students that had artistic ability, they contributed by making a manga that tells a story. So they don't necessarily have to be A students to participate in a project, service learning projects like this, that there's a flexibility that can cater to individuals' interests and strengths. And then students can capitalize off of experience and gain entry to other rewarding opportunities. So my primary example here is that 3 of the students that worked on doing the oral histories, that worked on the translation, are now part of a bigger, more developed project called Voices from Tohoku that's being run out of Sophia University. And so this volunteer effort begun here at LCJ has now opened up some doors in other digital humanities projects that can be worked on as well. And then it also aligns well with MEC's goals. So fostering respect for diversity. Students hear both American voices and beyond the stereotypes, learn about the degrees of interaction between Americans in Japan in the 1950s and 1960s and Japanese, which strengthens transnational communications. It creates a wide range of opportunities, enhancing superior talents and individualities. So this is all part of the MEC's guidelines, right? Encourages intergenerational understanding. And so helping the elderly, learning from the elderly in Sunagawa, builds that intergenerationality and strengthens community there. Now, there's also struggles related to that. Some of the struggles that were noted by a political scientist named Thomas Erlach, some of that rang true to varying degrees in our own experience, right? So a lack of institutionalization in colleges can make the maintenance of these activities challenging. There's always the difficulty of student recruitment, right? Students have other things going on in their lives, and if you're asking them to come out on a Saturday, that can sometimes be difficult. So whether they have other classes or part-time jobs or family responsibilities, that can remain an issue. And then faculty motivation, spreading thin with heavy teaching loads and other research responsibilities, right? So all that's stuff that needs to be dealt with. Luckily, this institutionalization seems to be changing or improving, I should say. Here there's at least 3 projects going on at LCJ. This one, and then one called Batsimena, and there's a hospitality club that is also beginning, that's getting out into the community. So it seems like it's becoming more institutionalized, and that should have an effect across the board. I think in terms of student recruitment, that possibly the way forward for us is looking for external grants, right? And then if we can bring students on as research assistants, then it helps with that competing responsibilities, right? That if they're getting paid, right, they're more accountable, they recognize an immediate reward. Of course, there's intangibles as well, but they recognize the immediate reward. And then other students will be attracted to the fact that there's this paid position that's relating to research, and I think that will help with recruitment. So I cut this last part a little bit short, but for the sake of time, I'll leave off there, and if anybody has any questions during the Q&A session, I can address them now.
Thank you very much.